Welcome to Perdido Key Gaming. As promised, I'm going to get into one of my favorite role-playing games. Picked up this game, I guess, in the early 80s. I was already into Dungeons and Dragons and things like that, and a friend of mine sold me his first edition Rolemaster, and I think that went along with he's the one who also sold me the Starfleet Battles in a little Ziploc baggie. But he handed over to me some old Rolemaster stuff. Well, not old, you know. It was, you know, this stuff is about as beat up as anything. But you know, it was one of those games, obviously riding on the tail of Dungeons and Dragons and Tunnels and Trolls and things like that. But what these guys went with was a different kind of magic system, in a different way of trying to, you know, give your character some sort of individuality. So you weren't just a fighter who swung a sword. You could be, you know, anybody could do anything. Okay, your fighter could learn magic. Your actual magic users or maggies or magicians could have a sword, you know, use a sword. And, you know, clerics weren't wearing heavy armor, but, you know, they could wear armor, you know, the usual stuff. Although their clerics were not really the healer types. What these guys did, what ICE did, Iron Crown Enterprises went with was, you know, healers. You know, the realms of magic were divided up into 3 different kinds of magic, and ended up being more kinds of realms of magic and things like this. And some of the classes could use 2 different kinds of realms of magic. So basically, everything was divided into realms. You had the realm of arms, essence, mentalism, and I forget the other one. Anyway, but 3 realms of magic and the realm of arms. So, you know, this was the first one, and it was notorious for being called Rolemaster, as in rolling dice, because there were a lot of charts and lots of tables and things like this. And it didn't use, you know, 4-siders all the way up to 20-siders. It went with percentage. So, you know, these charts were insanely, you know, not difficult to read, but it could get out of hand. The good news is, even, you know, with the way that the fighting and the way that combat went and everything, a first-level fighter or first-level warrior could potentially take out a 20th level warrior. That's how the combat system worked. The criticals in this were not only pretty vicious, but humorous at times. But then, you know, I ended up with what I'm guessing is, I guess you'd call it 2nd edition Rolemaster. That's my favorite. That's my favorite version of the whole thing. Same sort of stuff. Character law, campaign law, lots of charts. The same 19 different character classes. The same combat tables. Oh yeah, and you know. I was talking about 1st level versus 20th level. If you ran into a kitty cat, for example, using claw law, yeah, the kitty cat could kill a 20th level fighter too. And you know, the way that they did the spells were that they were in lists. Each class had 6 to 8 lists. Those were the base lists. Each of the lists had a certain number of spells, all divided into categories. So, you know, and they were all geared towards that particular class. So, you know, your animist, druid type, you know, animal mastery, herb mastery. Clerics were going with channels and summons and repulsions and protections. So they weren't the healers. They were actual priests of the gods, and that's what their lists were aimed at. you wanted a healer, well, you're going to have to go ahead and find yourself an actual healer. So that was, yeah, this one's definitely beat up. Wish they'd make PDFs of these things. But this one was the one that got started rolling, okay? So, you know, they started adding companions to these things. Yeah, look at that. The companions would add additional classes, more rules, and like I said, in, you know, more stuff like the arcane list. So, you know, your archmage, you know, the basic fundamental part of magic was, you know, the arcane list, and they got, you know, ended up as 3 different kinds of realms. But yeah, they went through any number of Rolemaster companions. Rolemaster 2 added a substantial amount of classes and more rules. Companion 3, the same thing, just more and more classes, so your options became enormous. So that's what, like I said in previous videos, the options are what makes it. There's going to be people that want to, you know, a thief that uses magic. All right, well, you know, this sort of thief he's using magic. Well, it's very hard for them to learn magic, but he's, you know, pretty easy for them to learn picking lock skills and setting trap skills and things like that. But they could do it, you know. So some of the classes were, you know, arms, semi-spell users, arms, and magic. So, you know, you did get your, you know, thief who actually could do magic. They did it poorly, but they could do magic. Once you got into some of these later companions, like 5 and 6 and 7, you know, it started to get kind of old with the classes and everything like that. They tried to introduce different kinds of systems, but invariably you're going to see a ton of optional, you know, lists and things like that for folks to use. And usually more magic items and everything if you weren't generating those yourself. They had you know, the usual monster manual. They crammed all this in one. They had a bunch of natural creatures, a bunch of supernatural creatures, your usual suspects: goblins, dragons, demons, devils, and usual magic items, all the way up into artifact power items, which, you know, if you were a high-level alchemist, then you could, you know, create magic items and stuff like that. It's not like your alchemist or folks like that were going on adventures with you, at least you hope not. But, you know, they'd be sitting back at home creating stuff. So more creatures, more treasures. When they got to Creatures and Treasures 3, I think they were running out of ideas that, you know, so the creatures got kind of, if you ask me, they got kind of silly. Elementals, things like that were present. Even the Magic the Gathering sliver makes its appearance, although it's not the same creature. And you know, trying to make things interesting, just like about the same time Dungeons and Dragons came out with their Oriental companion. Here comes this Rolemaster with their Oriental companion. And the giant thick book of alchemy, introducing, I forget how many different alchemy type classes, but, you know, and these were classes that were geared towards certain types of societies and things like that. So, you know, if alchemy was only present in large kingdoms, then you had your Royal Alchemist class. And all the spell lists were different, and what they did were different. So, you know, it was kind of crazy. Elemental Companion, just kind of detailing more of the creatures and the way the elements worked. You know, you could have your fire, water, you know, earth and air elements, and that's it. And that's the way your campaign might work. Or you might have none. Or you might have, you know, 36 elements, depending on, you know, your, you know, whatever you wanted to do. But They had different classes and huge amounts of elemental creatures and force, critical tables and things like that. Needless to say, you probably need a computer program these days to keep track of the way, stuff works. Arms companion, more options for your warriors since they're getting stomped by the, the magic using classes. And all these rules were kind of optional. You could damage by location and things like that, but I thought it was always just better to keep to the just damage and whatever the critical did. So if the critical took off somebody's head, then that's fine. Why worry about doing 3.8 points of damage to somebody's elbow? It's kind of out there. And more spell stuff. They introduced prosaic magic, which was easier for those non-magic users to use, and shopkeeper magic, stuff like that, which is interesting. If you wanted to shine up all your little things in your shops, on your shop's shelves, then you could cast your spell to shine everything up. It was kind of silly, but could have practical applications. They had a very short-lived magazine that came out. There was some good stuff in there. There's they adding different kind. They had the folk mage in there, which if you think about it, that's probably the way some societies work. They had their witch or their folk mage to do all the work. And this was something to add on. It was just heroes and rogues. Basically, maybe you had some guy enter the campaign late. You could see if they wanted to use one of the characters at the appropriate level, because all the, it was a level up system. And here's what this guy has at certain levels and things like that. But it was just the basic classes that are in the original thing. There wasn't anything out of control. Or you could use them as non-player characters, but there's very few of them in here. I think one for each class. And then, when Rolemaster first came out, there was a bunch of these little modules and stuff that I believe it was still Terry Amthor that was the one doing those back in the 70s. And it ended up becoming, well, let's put them all together, and that was Shadow World. It was, pretty complex, but very basic idea how the world worked. I mean, it was still up to the game master or dungeon master, or whatever you want to call them, to flesh out, the towns and the characters and things like that. But at least they had a basic idea of, the timeline, and everything was pretty why things were the way they were in the world. So it's very, I actually like this a lot. It was very well laid out. I mean, just as well laid out as Greyhawk and things like that, Blackmoor, and some of the other campaign settings that were in Dungeons and Dragons. But it was, this is like I said, I like the options. That's why I like kind of, third edition Dungeons and Dragons too, because it had a lot of options. I like second edition. I like second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. That was fine. But I think the options are what people want to see. How many, what's your party? It's 3 fighters and a magic user. In the case of third edition and Rolemaster and some of the other game systems like that, your characters were different. From a fighter who had massive levels in flower arranging or something like that. He was a well-renowned flower arranger, and he's, everybody in the kingdom loved him for his flower arranging, but he was still, he was a fighter. But, he could still fight. But who's going to waste your points on that? Because your points are generated by your stats, and that's another interesting thing about Rolemaster is your stats could literally go up and down. Dungeons and Dragons 2, right? They could go up and down, but they would go up and down at levels. I mean, as you got older, your strength might go down, your constitution might go down. Your hit points and everything like that were generated from your constitution, just like Dungeons and Dragons. And they kind of put a level. They kind of put a level on hit points. when I played, I didn't really put a level on it, a limit on the hit points. I mean, it seemed kind of silly when you're only gaining a couple of hit points per level that you're leveled out, you're limited to 125 hit points, You're worried more about whether something's getting past your armor at that point. But like I said, hit points don't matter if your head comes off with the crit tables in this particular game. Some of it's pretty funny. Your opponent could literally gain. The guy who took off the head would get pluses if he took off somebody, if he did a really heroic action and defeated the bad guy. So it's really interesting the way that the system was set up, but extremely complex. My advice was always, try to keep it simple. It's great having all those skills, but as long as your players knew when to roll, what to roll, you don't have to roll on everything. Everybody knows that just walking down the street, you don't have to roll to see if you broke an ankle or something. That's kind of silly, but the idea would only be to roll using your skills if there was something really necessary to do that. I mean, I think that's kind of obvious in the way, you're role playing. You're not trying to describe every little thing that happens to some guy while he's walking down the street. But anyway, that's my take on Rolemaster, 2nd edition. Don't think I'll go into the standard set or anything like that, although it's simplified things quite a bit. But that's my take on Rolemaster. Hope you liked it. Leave me comments if you have anything to add. Oh yeah, hit like and subscribe. That'd be great. And we'll see you again for probably some more Magic the Gathering